Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and our topics for tonight are escalation spiral, narrative control failure, a peace plan, and Israel on the brink. That fourth topic is one that I've added very, very recently, and we're going to cover it by looking at parts of the stream. And I'm going to add a link to the stream in the comment section right now. Okay. So, I see there are a few folks here. D has said hello. Hello, D. Glad to see you. Our first topic tonight, is escalation spiral. And I'm going to start on that topic with a piece from Mike Whitney. I found it on uns.com. Title is Bibi Will Bomb Iran, or maybe not. Stated October 6th, 2024. Pretty long piece. And the caption on the piece is Israel strikes an Iranian oil refinery. That is a picture of an F-35, of course. And on the bottom it says, this information is disinformation because it hasn't happened yet and may not happen. The piece starts, the long pervasive belief in American military supremacy is a myth. It's a mirage, a fallacious narrative fashioned from fables and Hollywood films. The U.S. military has not won a war since World War II. They have mercilessly bombed the crap out of many smaller, weaker countries, killed millions of people, and yet never once achieved a strategic victory. Not since World War II have they faced anything even faintly approximating high-intensity warfare. Indeed, never at any time in history has the U.S. military fought against a great power adversary at the height of its strength. And now, here in 2024, the U.S. military has never been in a more weakened state relative to any of its potential great power adversaries, namely Russia, China, and Iran. An epoch of great changes, is upon us. This is a quote from Will Shriver, at iMetatron Inc. It was a lengthy tweet, as a matter of fact. I don't know if I entirely agree that Iran is a great power adversary, but it's certainly a great power in West Asia. It's certainly a regional great power. We, of course, try to project our power into West Asia, and it turns out that we might not be as great a power there as Iran is. Let's cut to the chase. Says Mike Whitney. On Saturday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered his most ominous statement to date. He said, quote, Iran is behind all the threats, all the threats against us. They launched hundreds of missiles against us in one of the biggest attacks in history. No country in the world would accept such an attack. Israel will not accept it either. Israel has the duty and the right to defend itself and respond to such attacks. And this is what we're going to do, unquote. The statement has been interpreted. Oops, sorry. I clicked the link I should not have clicked. I'm sorry about that. Let me go back to where I was. Okay. The statement has been interpreted by many as a straightforward pledge to launch a retaliatory strike on Iran. According to reports in the media, Israel's war cabinet is debating whether to strike Iran's oil infrastructure or its nuclear facilities. But whatever the target, Iranian officials have warned that, quote, any Israeli attack, unquote, will be met with an overwhelming and immediate response aimed primarily at Israel's vital infrastructure. The warning was delivered in a short missive that was passed on to the Biden administration via allies in Qatar. The contents were later revealed in an article published by Al Jazeera. Quote, sent a message to Washington via Qatar. Which addressed the situation in the region after our last strike on the Zionist entity, and in which we confirmed the end of the phase of unilateral self-restraint, and that individual self-restraint does not secure the requirements of our national security, and any Israeli attack will be met with an unconventional response that includes infrastructure. In short, Iran no longer believes that simply demonstrating the capability of its missile systems is changing Israel's behavior. So the next time Iran is forced to attack, it's going to inflict as much damage on Israel as humanly possible. It doesn't get much blunter than that. If Israel attacks Iran, Iran is going to, quote, bomb the hell out of Israel. Full stop. That is why, as of Saturday afternoon, the Biden administration has deployed, quote, dozens of additional U.S. fighter jets to the Middle East, unquote, along with 40,000 by U.S. military personnel and 2 carrier strike groups, all of which will be used in the upcoming Israeli war on Iran. This is the state of play on Sunday, October 6th. We're on the brink of a full-blown regional war that will inevitably involve both the United States and Russia. But why would Biden agree to support Israel in a war against Iran when Iran just proved that its state-of-the-art ballistic missiles far exceed anything in Israel's arsenal and are obviously capable of destroying Israeli military sites, energy platforms, intelligence centers, and vital infrastructure? This is from a post by the armchair warlord. Quote, the Iranian strike on the Nevatim and Tel Naf airfields in Israel on Tuesday completely validated my analysis from April. In April, the Iranians demonstrated they could defeat Israel's ballistic missile defense system at will and strike precision targets. This time they did damage. Video of the engagement suggests that the vast majority of the Iranian salvo, probably more than 80%, penetrated and struck targets in Israel. The Iranians can be expected to have damaged aircraft, infrastructure, SAM systems, and AD radars at both of the airfields, as well as hitting several other targets elsewhere in the country less intensively. The effectiveness of the strike can be seen by simply observing the Israeli reaction. Rather than an immediate counterattack, they have withdrawn for deliberations, with some talk of a de-escalatory downward step of retaliation against the Houthis or Hezbollah. Of course, I don't know how well that's going to go, because right now, Hezbollah uh, uh, um, and the Houthis and Hamas and the Iraqi resistance are all peppering Israel with rockets and missiles, doing considerable damage to Tel Aviv and to Haifa and to other areas of the country. But anyway, going on with the quote. The reason for this is simple. The Iranians have now demonstrated the ability to overwhelm the Israeli AD system at will and precisely strike targets. And with their missile shield ineffective, the Israeli leadership is coming to terms with the fact they run a small and isolated country with a limited amount of critical infrastructure. At this point, the Ayatollah can push a button and turn the lights out in Israel, and no amount of American money can prevent that. Again, this is a quote from the armchair warlord at armchair W. That last is the Twitter handle. And although the Israeli-friendly media has tried to sugarcoat Iran's October 1st attack and make it look like a big nothing burger, some of the mainstream journalists have come to their senses, realized that madman Bibi wants, quote, to have another go, unquote, at Iran, which, by the way, would be suicide. Check out this piece in today's Guardian, which is aptly titled, Escalation with Iran would be risky. Israel is more vulnerable than it seems. And there's a quote from there. Satellite and social media footage has shown missile after missile striking the Nevatim air base in the Negev Desert, setting off at least some secondary explosions, indicating that despite the highly touted effectiveness of Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow air defenses, but not to mention David's Sling, by the way, Iran's strikes were more effective than had been previously admitted. Experts who analyzed the footage noted at least 32 direct hits on the airbase. That's the Nevatim airbase. None appeared to have caused major damage, but some landed close to hangars that house Israel's F-35 jets, among the country's most prized military assets. Quote, the core fact remains that Iran has proven it can hit Israel hard if it so chose, writes Decker Everleth, an analyst with the Research and Analysis Group, but CNA, that's the Center for Naval Analysis, if I remember my alphabet correctly, analyzed the satellite images for a blog post. Quote, air bases are hard targets and the sort of target that likely won't produce many casualties. Iran could choose a different target, say a densely packed IDF ground forces base, or a target within a civilian area, and a missile strike there would produce a large number of casualties, unquote. Quote again, Israel's counterattack appears to be imminent. Local journalists have been briefed that the response to the Iranian strike is imminent, perhaps to be timed just before or after the 7th of October anniversary of the Hamas attacks. I have to add at this point, and then go back to the quote. Of course, it's now October 8th, And the Iranian strike has yet to take place, as far as I know. Might be taking place as I speak now, but it won't be too long before we've gotten past, another night. It's now 4 a.m. in the morning in Israel. Uh, in other words, it's getting close to sunrise. And have a feeling that if Israel does respond and retaliate, it's going to attack with its planes at night rather than during the day. Anyway, going on with the quote. The target options include Iranian military facilities, including Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps infrastructure, or command and control centers, and energy infrastructure such as oil refineries, which could lead to a similar strike on Israel. There is also the option of a direct strike on Iran's nuclear program, which Tehran has warned is one of its red lines and which Biden has warned Netanyahu not to do. Quote again, ballistic missile ping pong between Israel and Iran that at any moment can spiral out of control, can result in casualties in Israel, that would then result in further escalation, and that could then pull the United States in, resulting in Iranian allies targeting U.S. forces and bases in the region. In the attack, as added, Iran had, quote, used their most advanced weapons, and they have sufficient stockpile of being able to do that for months. That would be the world we'll be living in unless somebody pulls the plug on this cycle of escalation. Escalation with Iran could be risky. Israel is more vulnerable than it seems. That's the quote from The Guardian again. Think about that for a minute. Iranian ballistic missiles landed 32 direct hits on the Nevatim Air Base, the most heavily defended air base on the planet. The Iranians have shown that they can put their missiles on any target in any location in Israel, putting at risk, quote, the country's most prized military assets, unquote. That's worth mulling over, don't you think? So now we are finally hearing the truth about the October 1st attack, mainly because Israel's supporters are worried that Netanyahu is going to recklessly provoke Iran in order to drag the United States into the fray. But doesn't Bibi know that such an action would wind up inflicting incalculable damage to Israeli infrastructure, as well as the loss of an untold number of Israeli civilians? Sure, he knows, but he's betting that it will all be worth it if the United States is able to weaken Iran to the extent that Israel will emerge as the dominant power in the region. You see, in Bibi's eyes, Iraq, Syria, and Libya were all great victories because they helped to reinforce Israel's ambition to become the regional hegemon. Netanyahu's recent speech at the United Nations further underscored this point. Here is Bibi, and there are the two maps, of course. The curse includes Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and probably Jordan somewhere in there too. And the blessing includes the corridor from the Mediterranean going through Israel and Saudi Arabia and Oman to India. And Bibi said, this is the map I presented here last year. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, and fiber optic cables. This will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Continuing on with the quote, to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, we must continue the path we've paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and having seen the blessings we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, The millions of Israelis who have already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula over the skies of Saudi Arabia to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace. I say to you, what blessing such a peace with Saudi Arabia would bring. Continuing with the quote, it would be a boon to the security and economy of our two countries. It would boost trade and tourism across the region. It would help transform the Middle East into a global juggernaut. Our two countries could cooperate on energy, water, agriculture, artificial intelligence, and many, many other fields. Such a peace, I am sure, would be a true pivot of history. It would usher in a historic reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel, between Islam and Judaism, between Mecca and Jerusalem. I have to interrupt this quote to remark, how is there going to be a reconciliation between Islam and Judaism when the Israeli regime is contemplating building a third temple on the remains of the Dome of the Rock? There's never going to be a reconciliation if that happens. Going on with the quote. Such a peace would be the foundation for an even broader Abrahamic alliance. That alliance would include the United States, Israel's current Arab peace partners, Saudi Arabia, and others who choose the blessing of peace. I believe this vision can materialize much sooner than people think. And as Prime Minister of Israel, I would do everything in my power to make it happen. This is an opportunity that we in the world should not let go by. And then there's a link to the full text of his UN speech from the Times of Israel. And he goes on with his article, Pax Israel, the entire Middle East and millions of subjugated Arabs languishing permanently under the Israeli boot heel. This is the Zionist dream in a nutshell. A peaceful, prosperous region in which the dominant power, Israel, sits at the center of the critical economic corridor that links the production capability and gas reserves of the East with the technology and bustling markets of the West. Netanyahu is expounding on the geopolitical strategy that will be implemented to compete with China's massive Belt and Road infrastructure project, the only difference being that Tel Aviv will be calling the shots, not Washington. Surprised? Question mark. You shouldn't be. But what about the United States, says Mike Whitney. What will happen if the Biden administration relentlessly backs Israel and finds itself in a direct confrontation with Iran? How will that turn out? This is a long excerpt from an illuminating article by Kit Klarenberg titled Collapsing Empire, Iran Throws Down the Gauntlet. It helps to answer that critical question. And here's another quote from Kit Klarenberg. Quote, the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, JINSA, a powerful Zionist lobby, laid out in forensic detail how the empire will be at grave disadvantage in all-out hot war with Iran, titled U.S. Bases in the Middle East, Overcoming the Tyranny of Geography. The most important conclusion drawn is that Washington's, quote, current basing array detracts from our ability to deter Iran and fight them effectively in a high-intensity scenario. As such, JINSA notes, quote, a theater-level war with Iran would be a war of missiles and drones. Tehran's April 13th attack on Israel was a, quote, comprehensive demonstration of Iranian operational design, unquote. Quote again, the most pressing and obvious takeout was, quote, for the defenders of the Gulf, it will be a war of strike aircraft, tankers, and air and missile defense. And here is the problem, unquote, unquote again. These aircraft are largely based at locations along the southern coast of the Arabian Gulf, an artifact of planning against Russian incursions in the 1970s and the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns of the early decades of this century. They are close to Iran, which means they have a short trip to the fight, but that is also their great vulnerability. They're so close to Iran that it takes but 5 minutes or less for missiles launched from Iran to reach their bases. Most damagingly of all, quote, these bases are all defended by Patriot and other defensive systems. Unfortunately, at such close range to Iran, the ability of the attacker to mass fire and overwhelm the defense is very real, unquote. In closing his roadmap to Tehran's victory, Mackenzie bitterly laments, quote, it is hard to escape the conclusion that our current basing structure is poorly postured for the most likely fight that will emerge, unquote. The empire, quote again, will not be able to maintain these bases in a full-throated conflict because they will be rendered unusable by sustained Iranian attack, unquote. The imperial overreach in West Asia has now fallen victim to, quote, the simple tyranny of geography. Quote again, the Iranians can see this problem just as clearly as we do, and that is one of the reasons why they have created their large and highly capable missile and drone force, unquote. The question of whether the battlefield primacy of the resistance in West Asia will finally be comprehended by their adversaries in light of October 1st remains an open one. As Russian military strategist Igor Korotchenko once observed, quote, this Anglo-Saxon breed understands nothing but force, unquote. This comes from collapsing empire. Iran throws down the gauntlet. Kit Klarenberg, global delinquents. Cakewalk, massacre is more like it, says Mike Whitney. If the Biden administration decides to assist Israel in a war against Iran, the U.S. will see many of its military bases razed to the ground, and many of its warships sunk or disabled, and most of the region's oil platforms, quote, vanished, unquote, in a ball of fire. This isn't a dispute that can be resolved through the force of arms, and any attempt to do so will trigger a sharp decline in U.S. power and influence in the region and around the world. It's no overstatement to say that America's future hangs in the balance. The question is whether Team Biden will pull back from the cliff edge or not. And here are bases housing U.S. troops. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, no less than 11 bases. Between Israel, and Iran. And of course, they would all be very vulnerable to Iranian missile attack. They include bases in Syria, and Iraq. And that is the end, of the article. I have called this topic the escalation spiral. but it seems to me it might just as well have been called the fourth topic, okay, which is Israel on the brink. So in a minute, I'm going to bring up the piece that inspired, okay, the notion, okay, of Israel on the brink. But before I do, I'm going to share this to Facebook. And I'm also going to look at your comments as well. I seem to be screwing this up, so let me see if I can do this right. Here we go. Okay, so let me then take a look at your comments. I notice John B. is here. Uh, and so is Evelina, says hi all. Lana, who says hi all. John B. says the U.S. didn't even win World War II. Russia faced 80% of Germany's military might. The U.S. won the World War II peace economically by virtue of scheming economic advantage from desperate war destroyed uh, um, allies. Well, there is much to this, but certainly we were one of the victors of the war, okay, in Europe, and we were the primary victor of uh, the war in the Pacific. So I don't think we can forget about that part of World War II, the Pacific part. Oh, Jeremy says perhaps the U.S. won the war in the Pacific. I concede that. Okay, fine. And he says hi, Lana. And he says shared on Facebook and X. Thank you very much, D. John B. quotes Michael Hudson, quote, Herman Kahn's great achievement was to convince the U.S. empire builders that the key to achieving their control in the Middle East was to rely on Israel as its foreign legion, and that arm's length arrangement enabled the United States to play the role, as I said, of the good cop, designating Israel to play its role, and Israel has organized and supplied al-Nusra, yes, the successor, okay, to Al-Qaeda, while the United States pretends to denounce them. And it's all part of a plan that's been backed by the military, the State Department, and the national security operation. Yes, John B., I think I agree with that. Okay, so those are the comments for now. So I'm going to move to the second piece, which is titled Israel on the Brink. Okay, refers to the brink of devastation in war. And it is a YouTube piece. It's an interview, okay, by Nima Al-Rashid of Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Wilkerson, a retired colonel, Larry Wilkerson, who is best known as a special assistant for many years to Colin Powell, both when he was a general, okay, and when he was the Secretary of State. So I'm going to play some of this and comment a lot on it. Okay, they'll start in just.
Today is October 8th, and we're having Colonel Wilkerson with us to talk about what's going on.
Okay, the buffering is real bad. So let me see if I can refresh this and stop the
The
buffering.
folding swivel stand is silky smooth to use, allowing you to enjoy a high-quality entertainment and work experience.
This is the conflict between
Don't eat breakfast until you learn about caloric bypass. Your breakfast is setting you up for the entire day.
YouTube is not cooperating tonight. Let me move that a little back.
Seattle. Welcome to your afternoon newscast. We're here to bring you stories that matter most. Today marks the 16th anniversary of the tragic genocide. Commemorations are being held all around the world.
왜 아무것도 안 하셨어요? Was hast du während des Völkermords gemacht, Großvater? Mais tout était devant vos yeux. Did you just watch it? أساس ماما بينما يقتل أطفال مظلمة.
I'm on day 21 of the 28-wall Pilates.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. This should be in just a minute. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Very sobering. Got to regain my composure. Put together, I'm told, by the Turks. Erdogan finally spoke eloquently. hard to follow that act. If you want to get going, I'll ask you a question. Is the United States going to join Israel in attacking Iran? That's the question that is everywhere amongst my colleagues right now. We seem to be of two minds. One says, get everything ready to go because Israel will be an extremist, really an extremist, may see the end of the state much faster than people are thinking if we don't intervene. And if we intervene, we may see a 10-year war that we don't win. So it's a huge debate going on within the echelons of the U.S. military and the White House. Finally, you could accuse them of being drunk with all the tragedies. I mean, here we are with North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, reeling with probably over 1,000 people dead once they move all the rubble. And many people, probably hundreds of thousands of people without a home. And another hurricane of even more consequence probably headed at the same peninsula.
Larry, right now we're learning that Biden is trying to do everything in order to avoid a major war between Israel and Iran. And it seems that Gallant wanted to be in Pentagon and talking with people in Pentagon. But right now we've learned Netanyahu has asked him to cancel his trip to the United States. And what's going on in your opinion right now in terms of the conflict between Israel and Iran? And right on the other hand, we have Israel bombing Hezbollah, Lebanese, and Syria. They're bombing Syria as well.
Okay, just to stop it, okay, for a minute, to comment. So Gallant was called back by Netanyahu. He did not come to the United States. The Israelis have obviously been having intense discussions about whether to attack or not. We don't know what the United States has decided at this point, whether we're really trying to pull back on the Israelis, whether we've told them, okay, that we're going to pull back or not. But as far as Israel bombing in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, that may be going on, but Israel is also getting the stuffing kicked out of it by Hezbollah, the Iraqi resistance, Hamas, okay, and the Houthis. Very many missiles, rockets being fired at all segments of the country. For the first time, Israel in its civilian areas has been taking real punishment. Hezbollah, in particular, has been enormously effective at hitting Israel. As we said in earlier streams, the assassination of Nasrallah did not take any military capability away from Hezbollah. And ever since he has died, they've been proving that. Okay, in their rejection of the Israeli ground invasion and in the barrage of missiles and rockets they've been firing at Israel every single day since.
And don't forget Russia
Yeah,
at Taurus.
and we've learned that Russia is just moving a huge airplane. Just if I'm not mistaken, 2 days ago, a huge airplane landed in Syria with Russian weapons. The same airplane landed to Iran, if you remember, after when Shoigu went to Iran. It seems
Right.
that Russia is transferring weapons to Syria.
I wouldn't doubt it at all. I would even think they might be transferring them more widely than Iran and Syria eventually, if not immediately.
And to supplement also that comment, they've already said they'll be arming Hezbollah as well, and they may have started doing that already.
I would put one of two interpretations on what you just described. I'd heard some of it, but not the way you said it. And when you said it that way, it put in mind these two things. One, Yoav Gallant was coming to meet with Austin and ostensibly others to talk about how and if the United States might join in an attack on Iran. Probably post what Israel's going to do on its own, that will then invite a really massive strike from Iran. Then we would respond along with Israel. Or he was going to do that or something like that, and Netanyahu decided, I'm going to do it. Screw you, get back here. Because he didn't want to have the United States have any influence on it whatsoever until he'd done it. So my guess would be the latter.
And
he
here
wants
in
to go.
yeah,
He wants to go ahead and start it himself.
just moments ago, 2 hours ago, Netanyahu gave a message to Lebanese. I'm gonna play it out for you to see.
What's the difference between a service animal and an emotional support pet? Well, a service animal
What is?
Message to the people of Lebanon. Do you remember when your country was called the Pearl of the Middle East? I do. So what happened to Lebanon? A gang of tyrants and terrorists destroyed it. That's what happened. Lebanon was once known for its tolerance, for its beauty. Today, it's a place of chaos, a place of war. Israel withdrew from Lebanon 25 years ago. But the country that actually conquered Lebanon is not Israel, it's Iran. Iran, which finances and arms Hezbollah to serve Iran's interests at Lebanon's expense. Hezbollah has turned Lebanon into a stockpile of ammunition and weapons and a forward Iranian military base. Just one day after the October 7th massacre a year ago, Hezbollah joined the war against Israel. It launched an unprovoked attack on our cities and on our citizens. It has since fired over 8,000 missiles at Israel. killing civilians without distinctions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Druze. Israel has decided to put an end to this. We've decided to do whatever is necessary to return our people safely to their homes. Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel also has a right to win, and Israel will win.
Let me just pick up on 3 lies quickly. 3 bald-faced but typical Netanyahu lies. First of all, the invasions in 78, 82, 06, and now by Israel did more to destroy Lebanon than anything Hezbollah ever did, or anybody else with influence over Lebanon. Second, that's the first lie. Second, there were hardly any civilians injured in Hezbollah's very circumspect shooting of missiles into Israel. Au contraire, thousands upon thousands, and now I think Nader's figure is right. We know it's north of 150,000 and probably more than 200,000 people were killed in Gaza. Innocent civilians, many of them, children, babies, women, many of them, health workers, UN workers were killed by Israel. Bullshit, Mr. Netanyahu. And then unprovoked, what you're doing in Gaza was not a provocation to Hezbollah to do something back to you. Come on, Mr. Netanyahu. Whom do you think you're lying to?
And the point that he's making, Larry, is that we're winning. He says that we're winning. And can you find any place on the map that he's winning in that? Because in Gaza, you see the situation in Gaza. You see the situation with Houthis that he's having, the situation with Syria, right now with Lebanon. What is he talking about, in your opinion?
He's spinning lies. He's doing the same thing John Kirby does every day on behalf of the Security Council. He's doing the same thing Miller does every day on the part of the State Department. They're lying. They're lying through their teeth. They're fabricating the news as they go along. And then just as Dick Cheney did with regard to Iraq's weapons of mass destruction when I was in the government, they're feeding it to the major media. And the major media wants it from them because it's not got anything of its own. It doesn't even have enough people to get anything on its own anymore. Foreign policy is not an issue with most major U.S. outlets, whether they're visual or print. So what they do is they deal with things like Kim Kardashian's rear end, or Ben Affleck and whomever his latest squeeze is, or whatever. That's their issue. That's what they do. Nima, I'm appalled that the Washington Post and the New York Times are not even covering very much at all what's happening down in the southeastern part of the United States, where people are dying, people are starving, people have no water, their homes are gone. They watch, in some cases, watch them wash away in rivers. All you got to do is look at the videos of it to just wrench your heart. I can't find anything much about it in any of the media up here. I have to go on YouTube to find it. I have to go to so-called alternative media to find it. All the mainstream media does is lie. And when it comes to Israel, all they do is ask for the lies from Bibi's propaganda machine and then augment and publish them. That's all they do.
Just to comment a bit on that, if you're old enough to remember.
I'm Eugene Vindman. I'm a Democrat running for Congress in a district we must win. It's
If you remember the Iraq War, okay, in the early 90s,
Laurie, they were talking about
sorry, of course, okay, it was a slaughter, okay, an absolute slaughter. But there was a character we came to know, okay, in that war. He was the PR person, okay, of the Iraqis, and he was known as, as Baghdad Bob. Now, the spokesman for the United States and their characterizations of what's going on inside of the Middle East, and the spokesman for the Israelis themselves, they are the new Baghdad Bobs. That's the ironic and incredible thing. We still have Baghdad Bobs, and they are us. And that is awful to contemplate.
attacking Iranian nuclear facilities. Right now, it seems that the Biden administration was successful in convincing them not to attack nuclear facilities. They're talking about the industrial facilities, the oil industry. They're talking about these type of locations in Iran. How do you see, in your opinion, if they attack, and what would we expect from Iran to respond?
I think we can expect all manner of things, and none of them will be good. But I just got a report. Part of it was from the IEA, which I trust, the International Energy Administration, and part of it was from a friend of mine who's in the oil business. Most people would be shocked in the world, maybe. I don't know. People don't keep up with this as a routine matter, but the United States is the net exporter of oil and oil products today. We export more oil and oil products than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. 22 million or so barrels a day in 2024. Russia's about 8.7, Saudi Arabia is about 9. We could be on the end of a global oil situation, in other words, where it would be conducive to us to have some real interruptions in the Strait of Hormuz flow of oil, maybe Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and so forth. I think that's one reason you're going to see Iraq get more and more involved on the side of the so-called axis of resistance, even perhaps its formal government in Baghdad, because people will figure this out sooner or later. If we hit the oil facilities in Iran, I would fully expect them to come back and do what they did, only much, much more widespread destruction to Saudi Arabia and cut off some of that, maybe even as much as half of it. And maybe even hit Kuwait too, and maybe even hit Iraq too, just their oil facilities. I wouldn't expect that, but I would expect at least a repost that says, look what we can do. And then perhaps even close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, to close the Strait of Hormuz really wouldn't take that much. We were really worried about at a much larger and more powerful combatant command. We didn't call it that then. It was a unified command then in the Pacific when I was war planning in the 80s. And we did essentially 2 operations against Iran, Operation Praying Mantis and Operation Earnest Will. Earnest Will was when we reflagged Kuwaiti tankers, put U.S. or other country flags on them, and then we could escort them and defend them. And that way Iran was deterred from attacking them because that's what they threatened to do. It wouldn't take too many sunk in the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz to really give some problems to transiting that strait. And then Praying Mantis came along because they challenged us. They put some mines in the Strait of Hormuz and in the Persian Gulf. And we cleared the mines and we got challenged by the Iranian Navy and we attacked and we shot down a number of aircraft, as I recall. We shot up some small craft. We sank an Iranian Navy destroyer and we were on the verge of dropping a 500-pound bomb down the stack of the other destroyer, which was running away. And Ronald Reagan called us off. President Reagan called us off. The Iranians got the message. But they are a lot more astute now and a lot more capable now, especially in the realm of ballistic missiles. So if you want to see a U.S. aircraft carrier sunk in circumstances where we would be very shocked and surprised, probably, go ahead and do it. It's a different Iran now in terms of ballistic missiles, in terms of technology and warheads, striking power, speed, and so forth. It's a different Iran. I would not do what we did in Praying Mantis and Ernest Will today, not as a military professional, because I would not want to lose my major combatant ships. And that's what we'd be risking. So you're talking about a big war getting going, a really big war, a deadly war. And as I've said many times before, the only way the United States comes anywhere close to doing what it wants to do with regard to Iran, what John Bolton wants to do, what Lindsey Graham wants to do, and that's eliminate their nuclear program. These people are idiots. Bolton and Graham, all those people are idiots. You can't drop bombs on Iran's facilities and do anything but superficial cosmetic damage. You're going to have to go ashore and root the facilities out of their caves and underground structures and destroy them. That's the only way you're going to do it. So you're going to have to invade. 10 years, $10 trillion, and you won't have won at the end. And you'll have 90 million people really angry with you in a critical part of the world. And the Iraqis will join them. The Syrians will join them. The Jordanians will join them. The Egyptians will join them. And probably others will join them. And Israel and us will be not the hegemon in the Gulf. We will be run out of the Gulf with our tail of fire after 10 years of miserable fighting and thousands upon thousands of KIA and WIA on all around.
So we are on the brink of an unwinnable war, and a very dangerous war, which could become a nuclear war, okay, at any time. Okay, the Israelis are on the brink of it, but if we join them, we are on the brink of it, okay, as well. I wanted to make that very, very clear to you. And I also wanted you to see, of course, the beginning of that stream where we're looking 16 years in the future, actually 15 years in the future, at the 16th anniversary. And we're looking at basically museums around the world that are memorializing of the genocide, okay, in Gaza. I wanted you to see the emotional reaction of Nima and Larry Wilkerson, who remember was a professional soldier. It's important to drive home how serious this activity that we are contemplating is. And that clip I thought was very effective, okay, in doing that. And Larry's commentary was simply common sense. Simply common sense based on his knowledge of what is likely to happen. So I'm looking again at your comments. John B. says, Aaron Bushnell, quote, "What would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it right now," unquote. Robert Copeland says Russia's getting a lot of their weapons destroyed due to Ukrainian drone strikes. Also, I heard North Korean soldiers are fighting in Ukraine on the side of Russia. Yeah, I heard that too, but I haven't had a chance to look into it. Evelina said, who was he talking to? Not the Lebanese. Surely, yes, he was trying to talk to the Lebanese. John B. says, check out Putin Speaks if you haven't seen it. RT used AI to put English words to Putin's important speeches. His 2023 address to the Africa conference shows a great understanding of geopolitics. Oh, I think he's a master, okay, at geopolitics. Robert Copeland says the Houthi forces are in the wrong, as a lot of ships being attacked are not even going to or leaving Israel. Well, maybe they're in the wrong, but they are there, and they are a major threat, okay, to Israel. And of course, what they're doing is to try to get Israel to stop, okay, their genocide. John B. says most of that exported U.S. oil, quote unquote, comes from fracking, an environmental disaster. Yes, I know. Robert Copeland says this guy sounds a lot like Scott Ritter in what he is saying. There's Colonel McGregor, Scott Ritter, Colonel Wilkerson, Colonel Daniel B. Davis. There's Matt Ho. I forget if he was a colonel or not. Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. They all sound very similar, in their analyses of what is likely to happen. And the reason for that is that they are well-informed people on the military facts, okay, in the Middle East. And they are people who are not working for the United States right now. They're not a part of the command structure, so they can say what they think, and they are pulling no punches. And they all agree on these basics. I'm so sorry, Shane called me, and I missed part of your presentation, okay, but I am back. No, that's okay, Lana. Okay, so I am now going to my next topic, which is narrative control failure. And this is a piece by Alistair Crook. It's a masterful piece. He wrote it on October 7th, 2024. There's a picture of the Ayatollah speaking to the military, okay, I guess. And there's an archway formed. I guess those are rockets and missiles The West is in the throes of at least one, potentially two, crushing defeats at the moment. So the question arises, will lessons be learned? John Kerry, just last week at the World Economic Forum, so clearly blurting out the truth. Quote, our First Amendment stands as a major block to our ability to be able to hammer disinformation out of existence. Unquote. Translated. Governing is all about narrative control. Kerry articulates the quote international orders unquote solution to the unwelcome phenomenon of an uncontrolled populism and of a potential leader who speaks for the people. Simply, quote, freedom to speak, unquote, is unacceptable to the prescriptions agreed by the, quote, interagency, unquote, the institutionalized distillation of the, quote, international order, unquote. Eric Weinstein calls this the unburdening. The First Amendment, gender, merit, sovereignty, privacy, ethics, investigative journalism, borders, freedom, the Constitution, but gone, question mark. Today's reality unhinged narration is that Iran's launch on Tuesday of 200 ballistic missiles, of which 181 reached Israel. I don't know how he knows the exact number. 90% was claimed by the Iranians. Some others are saying it was 80%. The important point is that it was an overwhelming number of the ballistic missiles that were sent. Were overwhelmingly intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow missile defense systems, and with no deaths to show for the assault. It was, quote, defeated and ineffective, Biden pronounced. Will Shriver, however, a technical engineer and security commentator, writes, quote, I don't understand how anyone who has seen the many video clips of the Iranian missile strikes on Israel cannot recognize and acknowledge that it was a stunning demonstration of Iranian capabilities. Iran's ballistic missiles smashed through U.S.-Israeli air defenses and delivered several large warhead strikes to Israeli military targets, unquote. The effect and the substance then lies in, quote, proven capacity, unquote. The capacity to select other targets, the capacity to do more. It was, in fact, a restrained, demonstrative exercise, not a full attack. But the message has been erased from sight. How is it that the U.S. administration refuses to look truth in the eye and acknowledge what occurred? That is to say, our Baghdad Bobs again, and prefers instead to ask the entire world who saw the videos of missiles impacting in Israel to, quote, move along, unquote, as the authorities advise, pretending that there was, quote, nothing substantive to see here, unquote. Was, quote, the affair, unquote, just a nuisance to system governance and, quote, consensus, unquote, as Kerry so branded free speech? It seems so. The structural problem, the essayist Aurelian writes, is not simply that the Western professional class holds to an ideology, one that is opposite to how ordinary people experience the world. That certainly is one aspect, but the bigger problem lies rather with a technocratic conception of politics that is not, but, quote, about, unquote, anything. It is not really politics at all, as Tony Blair once said, but is nihilistic and absent of moral considerations, having no culture of its own. The Western professional class views religion as outdated and sees history as dangerous since it contains components that can be misused by, quote, extremists, unquote. It prefers, therefore, not to know history. This produces the mixture of the conviction of superiority yet deep insecurity, which typifies Western leadership, the ignorance and fear of events and ideas that fall outside the confines of their rigid zeitgeist, they perceive almost invariably as innately inimical to their interests. And rather than seek to discuss and understand that which is outside their capabilities, they use disparagement and character assassination instead to remove the nuisance. It must be clear to all that Iran falls into all the categories that excite most Western insecurity. Iran is the apex of everything that is unsettling. It has a profound culture and intellectual legacy that stands explicitly, quote, different, unquote, albeit not at odds with Western tradition. These qualities, however, relegate Iran to being unreflectively categorized as inimical to, quote, international order, unquote, but management, not because it is a threat, but because it, quote, unsettles, unquote, message alignment. Does this matter? Yes, it matters because it makes Iran's ability to communicate effectively with the international order's ideological alignment highly problematic. The West sought and pressured for a mitigated response from Iran. Firstly, after Israel's April assassination of an Iranian general and his colleagues at the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Iran obliged. It launched drones and missiles towards Israel on the 13th of April in such a manner that sent a short, pre-warned, concerted message of capability, yet did not invite all-out war as requested by the West. Subsequent to the Israeli assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, a guest of Tehran participating in the inauguration of the new Iranian president, Western states once again pleaded with Iran that it should again refrain from any military retaliation against Israel. The new president had said publicly that European and American officials offered Iran the removal of substantive sanctions on the Iranian Republic and a guaranteed ceasefire in Gaza in line with Hamas terms if Israel was not attacked. Iran held fire, accepting to appear weak to the outside world, for which it was harshly criticized. Yet Western action shocked the inexperienced new president, Pezeshkian. Quote, they, the Western states, lied, unquote, he said. None of the promises were kept. To be fair, the new reformist president Iran did face a dilemma. It hoped to pursue a policy of restraint in order to avoid a damaging war. That is one side to the dilemma, but the other side is that this restraint could be misinterpreted, perhaps maliciously, and used as a pretext for escalation. In short, the flip side is that, quote, want it or not, war is coming to Iran, unquote. Then followed the, quote, pager assault, unquote, and assassinations of the Hezbollah leadership, including the iconic figure of its leader, Sayed Hassan Nasrallah, amidst huge civilian collateral deaths. The U.S. administration, President Biden, said simply that this was justice, quote unquote, being done. And once again, the West importuned and threatened Iran against any retaliation towards Israel. But on this occasion, Iran launched a more effective ballistic missile attack, the one which deliberately omitted targeting Israel's economic and industrial infrastructure or the Israeli people, focusing instead on key military intelligence sites. It was, in short, a demonstrative signal, albeit one with an effective component of inflicting damage on air bases and military and intelligence sites. It was yet again a limited response, and for what? Open sneering from the West that Iran was deterred, too frightened, too divided to fully respond. In fact, the U.S., knowing well that Netanyahu is looking for the pretext for war with Iran, offered Israel full support of the U.S. for a major retribution against Iran. Quote, there will be severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case, unquote, Jake Sullivan said. And quote again, make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel, unquote, Biden said. The moral of the story is plain. President Pezeshkian was, quote, played, unquote, by the West, shades of the West's deliberate, quote, Minsk deceit of President Putin, shades, too, of the Istanbul II Accords, knife in the back, restraint that the international order insists upon invariably is broadcast as, quote, weakness, unquote. The, quote, professional permanent class, the Western deep state, eschews any moral underpinning, makes a virtue, okay, of its nihilism. Perhaps the last leader capable of real diplomacy that springs to mind was JFK during the Cuban Missile Crisis and in his subsequent dealings with the Soviet leaders. And what happened? He was killed by the system. Of course, many are angry in Iran. They ask whether Iran projected weakness too readily and question whether that manifestation in some way contributed to Israel's readiness to strike Lebanon so ruthlessly and without any limitations as in the Gaza model. Later reports suggest that the U.S. has new technological intel not available to Israel that pinpointed Sayed Nasrallah's whereabouts and was supplied to Israel, which led to his assassination. If the West insists to so demean Iranian restraint, wrongly attributing restraint to impotence, is the European and U.S. world order uniparty ever capable of cold realism? Can they make a sound assessment of the consequences should Israel launch war on Iran? Netanyahu has made clear that this is the Israeli government's aim, war with Iran. To comment on this so far, the idea of the West wrongly attributing restraint, okay, to impotence is not new with respect to the Iranians. It also characterized the relations of the collective West to Russia for so many years. Putin showed restraint in opposing the West, protesting against various moves by the West, at least since 2008. And year after year, objecting to Western moves and to the bringing of NATO to the very doorstep of Russia again and again and again, but culminating in the 2014 coup inside of Ukraine and the war that ensued, against the Russian culture parts of Ukraine. And then again, Putin showing restraint in attempting to negotiate agreements the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements that would stop the uh, 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 um, um, that would stop the Ukrainian attacks on the Russian cultural part of their country, and then finally the Istanbul negotiations right after the beginning of the war, which was certainly very generous to Ukraine and which also showed a restraint. By the way, I forgot the attempts by Putin to communicate with Biden just before the start of the war in 2000, in 22, and to show restraint in not starting the war right then. But Putin's protests fell on deaf ears, and he was faced with little choice except to make an invasion of Ukraine. And even then, that invasion showed restraint because it was by relatively few troops, roughly 90,000 troops. It was like a slap upside the head to gain attention. And that led to the negotiations, in Istanbul. And Russia was ready to call it quits then, except for the intervention of the West. And Boris Johnson, in his visit to Ukraine, where he said to Zelensky, "You need to torpedo this agreement." And Zelensky did that. So Russia's restraint was again spurned. And this led to the ruinous war, which has now killed at least 600,000 of Ukrainian soldiers, which has led to the denuding of the population of Ukraine. So now we see less than 20 million people there, where at the start of the war there were 40 million people. So the West has this pattern of misinterpreting restraint or reluctance to start a war as weakness. But it is not weakness, it is just common sense. Going on with the article. Hubristic misperception of an adversary and the misperception of his hidden strengths is so often the precursor to wider war, World War I. And Israel is awash with fervor for war to establish its new order for the Middle East. The Biden administration is more than willing, quote unquote, laying the, quote, revolver on the table for Netanyahu to pick it up and discharge it, whilst Washington pretends to stand aloof from the act. Washington's ultimate target is, of course, Russia. That in diplomacy, the West is not to be trusted is understood. The story's moral, however, has wider implications. How exactly in such circumstances can Russia bring an end to the Ukraine conflict? It would appear that many more will needlessly die simply because of the uniparty's rigidity and its incapacity to, quote, do, unquote, diplomacy. Just as many more Ukrainians have perished since the Istanbul process was trashed. The West is in the throes of at least one, potentially two, crushing defeats at the moment. And so the question arises, will lessons be learned? Can the right lessons be learned? Does the professional world order class even accept that there are lessons to be learned? Question mark. That, of course, is a magnificent piece, by Alistair Crook. So full of wisdom, so important if people want to learn any lessons, at all. And I'm going to check your comments again at this time. Lana says, I heard Matt Ho, it's H-O-H, by the way, it's the way he's spelled, but this morning with the judge, okay, he, of course, Kay, is a military man himself. I believe Matt Ho was a colonel also. But most recently, he ran for the Senate as the Green Party candidate in North Carolina. This was in 2022. I don't know if you remember him from that, Lana. The Democrats tried to get him off the ballot. He fought them in court, and he won. He remained on the ballot. But of course, the legal fight sapped his campaign. Lana says, the Mahmoud guy you showed me also seems very informed. He is very informed, of course. Evelina, regarding the last article, do you really think the West misinterpreted the new Iranian president's, quote, restraint, as weakness? I think the Israelis may have misinterpreted it, as weakness. I don't know whether the United States did. I suppose it depends on who you're talking about. I don't think the Defense Department interpreted it as weakness, but Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan might have interpreted it as weakness. Joe Biden may have interpreted it as weakness. But anyway, go on. Any response by Iran would be used by the West as a pretext to strike. Any pretext would do. And perhaps that's true, but the way Iran responded, in this case, serious, that it raises questions in the West about whether they should be striking. They certainly think they have a justification to strike, in spite of the fact that only one person was killed in this Iranian attack. And he was a Palestinian, unfortunate enough to be hit by a falling object. But he was the only one who died. There were no other civilian casualties. They shot 200 missiles at Israel. And there were no civilian casualties because all the missiles were fired at targets that were military in character. I mean, that is really amazing. But I think we have to understand. Oh, he says, okay, I think you just answered my question. The West is, in this way, dense no matter who. They did the same with Russia. There is, a lot of density, but there's also a lot of misinterpretation of the strength of the other side. In the Russian case, there was surely misinterpretation of the strength of Russia. When Russia went into the war, the West was confident that they could be defeated by a combination of a strong army in Ukraine and sanctions against the Russians, which we thought would, tear their economy apart. We misinterpreted the strength the Russians would have in their trading relationships. We misinterpreted the extent, of the adaptability of Russia. We kept thinking of them as a gas station on steroids or something like that. And we, I think, totally misinterpreted their overall military capability and their capability to expand their army on fairly short notice and train new people. We misinterpreted their capability for defense. We misinterpreted their capability for air defense. We misinterpreted everything. And rather than taking that as evidence that we had better be careful in any new conflict that comes up, we've brought the same arrogance to the Middle East struggles. And by the way, here what we have is Russia coming to the aid of its allies in the Middle East, coming to the aid of Iran, coming to the aid of Syria, coming to the aid of Hezbollah, coming to the aid of the Houthis, the whole axis of resistance. because Russia has done so well in the war, in Ukraine, and in the development of their manufacturing capability for war, they are in a position to deliver very strong material help to the axis of resistance in short order. And I don't think we ever anticipated that. And we still haven't come to grips with the reality that those missiles can be devastating on our Navy, our ships in the Mediterranean, our ships in the Straits of Hormuz, our ships in the Bab el Mandeb Straits. We still don't seem to fully understand that with the weapons Iran has, with the Fatah 2 missiles, which were used to attack in Israel, our aircraft carriers can be targeted. And one of those missiles can sink an aircraft carrier with 5,000 people on it. Two of those missiles can sink both aircraft carriers and give us in short order 10,000 fatalities. I mean, this is all a disaster waiting to happen. And the people in the State Department and Jake Sullivan don't seem to recognize it. I think the Defense Department has begun to recognize the seriousness of the situation. I think Lloyd Austin has begun to recognize the seriousness of the situation. But there's no evidence that the State Department people are seeing the reality. Robert Combs says that Russia is struggling to defeat a smaller country. I don't think Russia's struggling. I think they're taking a long time because they had the following goals, Robert. They had the goals of the neutralization of Ukraine. Very important goal. The demilitarization of Ukraine and the denazification of Ukraine. And they have been accomplishing all those goals. But those goals were not to be accomplished with a blitzkrieg. By the way, when they started, they didn't have the troops for a blitzkrieg anyway. Now maybe they have the troops for a blitzkrieg. But their strategy was a war of attrition. And this war of attrition is demilitarizing Ukraine, in spite of all of the Western aid that has gone to Ukraine. It is demilitarizing Ukraine. And much of Ukraine has been denazified because the troops, the Nazi troops that were part of the Ukrainian army, in large part have been defeated, and many of them have been killed. The Nazis in the West, of course, still remain. But the eventual peace agreement here, which is going to be after an unconditional surrender, is going to make clear that those Nazis have to leave. Also, demilitarization will be fully accomplished, and neutralization will be fully accomplished. Steve says he fell asleep. What's up? Well, we're discussing the narrative control failure right now as one of our topics. And we're almost ready to take up the last topic. John B. says, China raised $800 million from poverty. The U.S. has put over half their population into poverty. I think the neo-libs have got economics stuffed up too. I couldn't agree more. Robert says, Joe, I disagree with you. I know you disagree. Ukraine has every right to defend itself. It's not a question of right, to defend itself. Sure, they had a right, to defend itself. But did they have a right to build a 600,000 person army with a very high level of arms, the largest army in Europe, right on Russia's borders? Did they have a right to do that? Did they have a right to seek membership in NATO, knowing that would be taken as an extreme threat, okay, by Russia? Well, sure, every nation has a legal right to do that, but we live in an international system where there are great powers and there are small powers, and the great powers have a right to defend themselves. And what this means for great powers is they have a right to structure the situation around them so that no close neighbors are threatening them. And whether or not they have a right to do this according to international law, they will do it because it's the right of a big power to establish its own security. Ukraine has every right to defend itself. God. John B., it's demilitarizing NATO too, Joe. If Turkey leaves NATO, NATO is plucked. I know, and Turkey is going to leave NATO. They're about to join BRICS. They're about to join BRICS. And I don't think they'll be able to stay in NATO for long if they join BRICS. I think Erdogan is coming close to stopping his double dealing with the West and the East and making a choice. He is likely threatened to join the war against Israel. If he joins the war against Israel, he's certainly leaving NATO. Oh, by the way, John B. is right. We have been demilitarizing NATO with respect to ammunition, with respect to tanks, uh, uh, not so much with respect to F-16s because we haven't given them too much F-16s. But most of the wonder weapons we have given them, and we have very little left for ourselves. Evelina says, Steve's been talking to Kay, I think. Steve says shared on Facebook. Robert says BRICS has big problems also. Robert, you are far too optimistic. There are problems that BRICS has, but the nations of BRICS have the motivation to solve their problems because BRICS has a chance to be dominant in the whole world. And the nations that are joining them know that. So those nations have motivation to solve their problems. When it comes to NATO, okay, and the collective West, there isn't a joint motivation to solve problems because the United States is so dominant. Everyone else is looking to the United States to solve NATO problems for the rest of NATO. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm more concerned with the corruption, okay, in Ukraine. I think the Russians, once the peace agreement is settled, I think the Russians will take care of the corruption inside of Ukraine. They will make sure that is done. I have confidence that Putin will clean up what's going on inside of Ukraine because I don't think he wants a corrupt nation on his border. Simple as that. Well, I'm going to move now to my final topic, which I think in the context is very appropriate. And that is an article by Jeffrey Sachs and Sybil Farris, and it's called A Practical Plan for Peace in the Middle East. You should be seeing it now. I'm sharing it. Middle East peace can only come through a two-state solution as mandated by international law and global diplomacy, write Jeffrey Sachs and Sybil Farris. And guess that's Gaza. Palestinian statehood is enshrined in the ruling of the ICJ, and numerous UNSC solutions. Of course, the UNSC is the UN Security Council. It's time to uphold international law for mutual peace and security, writes Jeffrey Sachs and Sybil Farris. And that's a photo credit from Getty Images, or to Getty Images. And this is from the New Arab. So Jeffrey Sachs published something in the New Arab. That's interesting. There will be no peace in the Middle East until the people of Palestine secure their unalienable right to life and liberty within the sovereign state of Palestine. This is a right that Israel cannot deny or veto. It is a right that is enshrined in the UN Charter, which, by the way, we wrote. Many UN Security Council resolutions and the recent decision of the International Court of Justice in its ruling that Israel's occupation of Palestine is a violation of international law. The U.S. says it is in favor of the two-state solution as long as it is negotiated by both parties. This is an obvious subterfuge. Since Israel already has a state and occupies Palestine, the U.S. position in practice gives Israel a veto over Palestine's rights. People under a brutal and violent occupation have no power to negotiate with the violent occupier. The Israeli Knesset recently voted against the state of Palestine, just to make clear to the world that Israel is not at all interested in the just solution under international law. As a result, of Israeli militarism, the region is on the brink of collapse. The U.S. pays lip service to peace while arming Israel to continue its genocidal campaigns. A couple of days ago, Israel secured an $8.7 billion U.S. aid package to support its ongoing war in Palestine and to open a new front in Lebanon. Yeah, that gets me so angry that we're giving Israel money to open up the new front in Lebanon. Are we nuts? I mean, we are nuts. With Israel's current government led by fascists, and they are Bezalel Smotrich, such as Bezalel Smotrich, the U.S. position is a license for Israel to kill, displace, ethnically cleanse, and violently suppress the Palestinians and now the Lebanese. During the past week, the Israeli indiscriminate bombing campaign in Lebanon killed thousands and displaced over 1 million from the south of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. In an unprecedented and reckless strike, Israel dropped 2,000-pound bombs, which, by the way, are American bombs, leveling entire neighborhoods of Dahiyah to assassinate the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. The attacks continue on a daily basis with an Israeli ground invasion spreading terror and mass hysteria. The situation may seem utterly hopeless, but it is not. The world is aghast at Israel's violence and U.S. complicity. The world cannot understand, and neither can I, how the U.S. Congress can give more than 50 standing ovations to Netanyahu, whose indictment has been recommended by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. I think Congress has lost its collective mind. I know a lot of the congressmen long ago lost their individual minds. The fact is that the blank check that Biden, Blinken, and others have given to Israel faces protest and revulsion inside the United States. The American people do not want to be complicit in genocide. The way out of the crisis is international law and diplomacy. The solution is at hand: the immediate implementation of a Palestinian state, backed by the U.S. Security Council and the UN General Assembly, is the way to avoid a full-blown regional war. The political and peaceful solution was already presented by the Arab nations in the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative of Beirut, whereby Arab states would enter into a peace agreement with Israel based on Israel's full withdrawal from the Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese occupied the territories. On September 27th, Ayman Safadi, Jordan's Minister of Foreign Affairs, speaking on behalf of the Muslim Arab Committee, mandated by 57 Arab and Muslim countries, confirmed the region's willingness to guarantee Israel's security and establish peace in the context of a two-state solution. The UN Security Council has the authority, and the people of the region and the world have the need to secure the peace through international law. There are no divergences in national interests among the P5 members of the Security Council regarding the two-state solution. The U.S., Britain, China, France, and Russia all share the same interest in regional peace. This is not a matter of great power politics. This is a matter of international security and rule of law in which all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council have a stake and responsibility. I got to comment on that. The way the United States has been seeing its national interest in recent years has been to see it as defeat of both Russia, first Russia, and then also China. And they've been seeing or been thinking that our national interest is in the destruction of the Russian Federation and breaking it into its component parts. This has been a clear goal of U.S. foreign policy. Okay, now I agree with Jeffrey that this is not in the interests of the United States. I don't even think it was in the interests of the United States to break up the Soviet Union. But this was certainly not in the interest of the United States. What's interesting in the United States is to learn how to play nice in the sandbox with the other great powers. That's it. We got to learn how to do that. I agree with Jeffrey that all 5 permanent members have a stake and a responsibility to forge a two-state solution. However, that is not the way our elites in the U.S. and Britain and France have been seeing their national interests. Now, that's a fact. It's a fact we have to come to grips with. And the only way that fact can be changed to a perception that these 3 nations will see that their real interest is in playing nice in the sandbox with others. The only way that's going to happen is if the current crisis in bringing them to the brink of a ruinous regional war, which is likely to escalate into a nuclear war, until they see this is what's going to happen, until they see they are not breaking up Russia, they're not going to weaken China, and that the only alternative is to accept the multipolar world, and with it, the two-state solution. Maybe this crisis will bring them to that particular realization. Maybe it will get Joe Biden to climb down from the mountain and to start playing nice with the other kids. I sincerely hope that's going to happen, because if it doesn't happen, we are all doomed to a nuclear war. Going on with the article, The 7-Point Path to Peace. The UN General Assembly has already taken a major step forward in its recent resolution backing the ICJ and calling on the implementation of the ICJ ruling in the coming year. We must therefore immediately enter the phase of implementation of the State of Palestine as a safe, secure, and peace-loving UN member state. While Biden and Blinken will not act, the incoming U.S. administration, whichever it is, God, Jeffrey, if it's Trump, you can forget about it, because Trump is tied to Netanyahu by the navel, like two Siamese twins. Whichever it is, should abide by the overwhelming will of the global community for peace, which is also the U.S. overwhelming interest. The Israel lobby will continue to press for U.S. isolation from world opinion, but the American people know better and will say no to the Israel lobby. Well, they may say no. We may say no to the Israel lobby, but the Congress has to say no to the Israel lobby. The president has to say no to the Israel lobby. And for that to happen, the Israel lobby has to be stopped from dominating the Congress and the executive branch with its billions and billions and billions of contributions. And we here, who are attending this stream, know what that means. It means a successful dump the corruption movement. Anyway, Jeff Sachs goes on. A practical plan for 2025 would follow those steps. First, in recognition of international law and the recent UN General Assembly resolution, the UN Security Council should call on Israel to withdraw its military presence from all occupied territories in line with the ICJ ruling within 1 year, to be replaced by peacekeeping troops under UN authority. Second, international peacekeepers should be deployed to protect both populations as disarmament is conducted and as Israeli forces withdraw from Palestine. All regional paramilitary forces will be obliged to stand down, and funding for them by outside countries will cease. The UN Security Council would agree on the composition of the peacekeeping forces and oversee their deployment to ensure mutual security arrangements. Third, the State of Palestine should be admitted as the 194th UN member state to its rightful place among the community of free and sovereign nations on the borders of June 4th, 1967. That's before the 1967 war, with its capital in East Jerusalem. Fourth, the Palestinian Authority should propose a constitution and a national governance plan in line with international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with a commitment to hold national elections. Fifth, under the leadership of the UN Security Council, the modalities of issues such as Israel's illegal settlements and also possible mutually agreed land swaps between Palestine and Israel will be established within a predefined time frame. Sixth, as part of the establishment of the State of Palestine, a regional peace and normalization deal would ensure mutual security and stability for neighboring countries, ending all hostilities across the region. Well, as regards that, it's going to be necessary for the powers that be to stop the activities of groups such as ISIS, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and other groups that have been used, at least by one of the great powers, to destabilize the whole region. That kind of activity has to stop. Sixth, As part of the establishment of the State of Palestine, a regional peace and normalization deal would ensure mutual security and stability for neighboring countries, ending all hostilities across the region. And 7, a Palestine Recovery and Sustainable Development Fund will be established with funds from the U.S., Israel, the Arab nations of the European Union, the BRICS nations, and others to rebuild Palestine and establish the infrastructure for its regional sustainable development. Jeff Sachs is a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He's also president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and a commissioner of the UN Broadband Commission for Development. Follow him on LinkedIn, Jeffrey Sachs. Sybil Faris is the advisor on Middle East and Africa at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Follow her on LinkedIn, Sybil Faris. Have questions or comments, email us at editorialenglish@newarab.com. Opinions expressed in this article remain those of the authors and do not necessarily represent those of the New Arab, its editorial board or staff, or the author's employer. And so that's that. That's the peace plan. Of course, I'm for the peace plan, allowing for the comments I've made about it. I think that since we are on the brink of war, and we're talking about that for much of this stream, it was perfectly appropriate to end the stream with what Jeffrey Sachs and Sybil Faris are calling a practical plan for peace in the Middle East. I would prefer it to have been a practical plan for peace in West Asia, but I'll take a practical plan for peace in the Middle East. Now back to your comments. Robert says, 2 of the BRICS nations have a declining birth rate, and China's economy is not as good as everybody thinks. Well, that may be so, but the U.S. economy is not as good as everybody thinks either. I don't know if anybody's economy is as good as everybody thinks. Robert Copeland says, about Israel's economy, we shouldn't even talk about Israel's economy because Israel's economy is gone. So it's gone. Robert says, I hope Joe does another Dump the Corruption show, as I got a lot to say on that issue. Okay, Robert, I'll be doing another Dump the Corruption show. I don't know when. I'm not too worried about a Dump the Corruption show until after the election, I have to say, because we're not going to dump the corruption but during this election. I mean, the die is cast. The corruption is in full bloom, and there's no action we can take against it until after the election. Steve says, Robert's work for renters in California is commendable. Steve says, I'm a renter in Los Angeles. My daughter is also a renter in the Los Angeles area in Burbank. John B. says, the world should not accept the state of Israel while ever it is an apartheid state. Of course it should not. Since Israel won't renounce apartheid, a two-state solution is impossible. A good point. Perhaps the two-state solution should specify the end of the apartheid state in Israel. Would Israel accept that? It would accept that if the whole world organized against it, and if a two-state solution were enforced upon it. It would accept that. then there might have to be one more response by the Iranians to the Israelis to get them to expect it. We have to note here the Iranians have promised that if Israel retaliates against it, it will retaliate against Israel with 10 times the missiles it has already sent and will retaliate against the whole infrastructure of Israel. That's going to totally devastate the infrastructure of Israel. Israel will have no water, will have no electricity, will have no economy, and will not be in a position to do anything else except uh, the peace treaties and the arrangements of peace that are forced upon it by the international community. Steve Wolfbrand says, TDS, never Kamala, maybe Bill, but Jill Stein. Look, Steve, I hate to say it, but the Jill Stein ship has sailed. There's no way in 4 weeks that you're going to change the opinion of enough people to go for Jill Stein, nor will you change the opinion of enough people to go for Trump. So I'm afraid we're stuck with Kamala. And the reason why we are stuck with Kamala or possibly with Trump is because we did not build a dump the corruption movement over the last 2 years. It's as simple as that. We had to be ready by the start of the 2024 campaign, and we were not ready. And Steve says, Robert, not really. We are fed up with corruption. We should be fed up with corruption, but we've got to have that movement. We just have to have it. John B. says, I fear Jeffrey Sachs is unwittingly emulating King the Canute. He may be doing that, but what he is doing is he is following international law as defined by the United Nations as a collectivity. And can he really recommend anything else? Now, it might be more sensible to force upon Israel and Palestine a political system which is entirely democratic for all of the area between the river and the sea. But many of the stakeholders in a solution, particularly the more conservative Arab states, won't want that. They want a two-state solution. They don't want to see Hamas totally dominant in Palestine. They want to see a continuing solution where Palestine is divided between two states. So advocating for a one-state solution is also unwittingly emulating King Canute, because the powers that be don't want that. Now, it's true that the Israelis don't want it and the Palestinians don't want it. They both want a one-state solution from the river to the sea, their own one-state solution. But the international powers do not want that. And so, in the end, that's not what we're going to have. I think a big and important question is whether the next Iranian retaliation will do so much damage to Israel that it is militarily prostrate. I think that could happen. We have to wait and see. Evelina says, I'm with Steve on that, and Jill Stein. Look, I'm with Jill Stein too, in a sense that I certainly prefer Jill Stein to Kamala and to Trump. Much prefer Jill Stein to Kamala, okay, and to Trump. But unfortunately, I don't want to unwittingly emulate King Canute. We can't do that. It's too late for that. Jill Stein should have been nominated by the Green Party in the summer of 2023 instead of in the summer of 2024. So she could have spent all this time raising money so she could have had a chance to get her message out. Nobody knows what her message is. Very few people even know she is running. Very few people knows what she stands for. You know how much money Jill Stein has raised in this campaign? At the last look at Open Secrets, she had raised a little more than $1 million. Cornel West raised a similar amount. I forget what Claudia raised. It was much less than either of those two. Jill Stein raised 1/100th of the money Bobby Kennedy raised, and 1/1000th of the money that was raised by Kamala. Steve Wolfbrand says Kamala speaks nonsense. Of course, often she speaks nonsense. And she speaks nonsense with, I think it's already $1.3 billion. And she's outraised Trump, but of course, before the end of the campaign, there will be a flood of super PAC money going into Trump. So in the end, he will also have $1 billion supporting him. D says an important protest vote, hashtag Jill Stein 2024. I agree. That is an important protest vote. But since I am a victim of Trump derangement syndrome, then I am of the opinion that you vote for Jill Stein in states that are safe for either side, but that in swing states, you vote for Kamala. Why do I think we should vote for Kamala? Because I really think that Colonel Wilkerson will not be going to jail under Kamala. And I think I will not be going to jail under Kamala. And I think most of the alternative media people will not be going to jail under Kamala. But I sincerely believe that many of us will be going to jail under Mr. Trump once he consolidates his dictatorship during his second term. And I do think it's a certainty he's going to do that. Robert says RFK Jr. is still on the ballot in California. Well, I don't know why anybody would want to vote for him. Given all the terrible things that he is for. John B. says, I wouldn't vote for any of the duopoly. Well, voting is a personal choice. We all have a right to make that personal choice. And as I've said, but my consideration is if it's a swing state, then I am voting for Kamala because my priority is no Trump. I am in what is marginally a swing state. If the margin had been 15 points when I voted, I would have voted for Joe, happily. But unfortunately, in Virginia, it's still too close. Okay. So that was my consideration. Others, may disagree. They still may think we would escape a dictatorship under Trump, but I don't think we will. I don't think we will. I don't think there's a chance. Who's going to stop him? The Supreme Court? No.
He told everyone he wanted to be a dictator.
Well, he just said he was going to be dictator for a day. So people aren't taking him seriously.
The first day.
Yeah, the first day, right. So people aren't taking him seriously. They think he was just kidding.
No.
Or they think he can't become a dictator. I don't know why. Robert Copeland says Trump scares the heck out of me. Scares the heck out of me too. Not just Trump. J.D. Vance scares the heck out of me too. Okay. I mean, if we don't get a dictatorship under Trump, we certainly will get a dictatorship when Trump is out of the White House, which may be soon anyway, because he doesn't look any too healthy to me. We might have J.D. Vance sooner than we think if he becomes the vice president of the United States. Anyway, Steve keeps saying TDS stock, stop that. Steve, I think you should stop that. You're not recognizing reality. You're just not. You're not recognizing reality. Trump is going to be a fascist dictator if he gets a second term. But the worst Kamala will do will be an inverted totalitarian dictator. That's bad, but at least we'll still be able to squawk and express our opinions and try to organize a dump the corruption campaign. But I think we have no hope of doing that if Trump actually becomes the president of the United States again. So on that note, I am going to say goodnight. I'll be back on Thursday, most probably with another international relations show. If it's not an international relations show, it will probably be a domestic show on the horse race or on some of the major issues. Thank you all for coming. Attendance was pretty good tonight. It was at rough, my indicator is showing about 55 people. That's good. It was not as astronomical as the last time when the indicator was showing something like 259 people, but that was very, very exceptional. John B. says the deep state won't let either of them govern. Well, we'll see about that. Trump's going to put his people into positions in the deep state. Project 2025 guarantees that. In other words, a lot of the deep state is people in positions of power inside of the government. Trump is going to remove some of those people and put his people in. Lana says good night. Steve says good night, D. Good night, Steve. Good night, Lana. Good night, John B. Again, thank you all for coming.